Okay, let's unpack this. Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we are taking a really unflinching analytical look at one of the most powerful and, frankly, daring pieces of social design in the world of live-action role-playing.
hmm
We are diving deep into the architecture of Just a Little Lovin', or JL, as it's often called. It's a renowned Nordic LARP, and it's set during, well, the seismic shift of the early 1980s AIDS crisis in New York City.
And we have an incredible stack of sources for this. We've got the actual designer notes, the full script, and a bunch of critical essays on the experience,
Yeah.
written by both participants and critics.
So this is way beyond just talking about a game.
Oh, absolutely. It's a deep examination of applied emotional engineering.
Right.
I mean, the central puzzle the designers faced was, how do you let players fully immerse themselves in a high-stakes historical moment?
Right.
One that's defined by intense desire, freedom, and then this sudden, terrifying specter of death. And how do you do that while maintaining a really robust, non-negotiable framework of psychological safety?
That's precisely the mission today. To understand how these complex, heavy themes, we're talking communal grief, escalating fear, desperate longing, how they're intentionally structured and, I guess, managed within a participatory format.
Yeah.
How do you map the reality and just the terror of a sudden culture-defining epidemic onto a player's emotional experience with both depth and this is the crucial part, with ethical safety?
Well, the designer notes make it explicitly clear that the primary goal was, they called it radical empathy. They wanted to capture a truthful sliver of the lived queer experience.
Okay.
And it was written with immense respect for queer history, using the appropriate vernacular of the era. The goal was to actively steer clear of any modern or, an outsider's gaze.
Yeah.
It's focused solely on the internal world of the gay community that was hit the hardest.
So this wasn't just a LRP with gay characters.
Not at all. It was one of the first large Nordic LRPs centered entirely on the gay male experience, which in itself was a huge cultural statement for the genre at the time.
Before we can even begin to unpack the mechanics of, well, desire and death, we have to fully set the scene. New York City, 1982 to 1984.
A cocktail of massive contradictions.
Totally. Politically, you've got the rise of the moral majority, the Reagan administration, all signaling the sharp turn toward conservatism.
And then that political shift is just completely juxtaposed against the vibrancy and hedonism that was the legacy of the sexual liberation movements of the 70s.
Right.
The source material paints this picture of gay men flocking to New York specifically for the Greenwich Village scene. It was a place of celebrated affluence, high social energy, and conspicuous consumption. The whole yuppie culture thing was emerging.
So it was the peak of desire, the peak of a certain kind of freedom.
It was.
But that freedom quickly ran into the unknown. The story of JL begins on the 4th of July, 1982. At this point, the virus is still, it's essentially a mystery.
Yeah, the sources remind us that just the summer before, articles in the New York Times had only described a mysterious gay cancer. And the sources are so historically precise here. The term AIDS, acquired immune deficiency syndrome, it wasn't formally proposed until a meeting of gay community leaders and federal officials later that month, on July 27, 1982.
So the players start Act 1 suspended in this horrifying liminal space.
Exactly. It's a place of blissful ignorance mixed with these growing, terrifying rumors. They know something is happening, but they don't know the scope or the cause or even the name for it yet.
And that historical accuracy provides the perfect emotional powder keg for the start of the game.
Absolutely.
So when we look at the design intent, the creators essentially said they were building a machine for empathy, but not just historical empathy, right?
No, it's bigger than that. They wanted to explore what people long for, what they fear, and how they cope when a sudden, terrifying crisis just appears out of nowhere. The 80s was the high contrast canvas, but they were ultimately trying to say something, universal about the human experience.
And they understood that the deepest connection point to the crisis for that community was desire itself.
Yes. They made this really intentional choice to use sexuality not just for arousal, but as the core engine to tell stories of complicated emotions.
Like what?
Like rejection, shame, the loss of control, and then on the flip side, extreme togetherness and love. That structural choice is what really elevates JL from just a historical drama to a piece of critical art.
And doing that required challenging the prevailing norms of the Nordic LRP scene, which you mentioned was, and usually still is, quite heteronormative.
They were specifically placing the experiences of gay characters and their narratives of love and death right at center stage.
The narrative framework itself, it's built around this brilliant thematic core. It splits the players into two distinct, kind of contrasting groups.
Right. And they're both, coincidentally, celebrating the 4th of July at a former rehab center in upstate New York.
So on one side, you have the main group. This is the Greenwich Village gay community, all gathered for Mr. T's party.
And they symbolize pure, unapologetic desire. This is the height of 70s and 80s freedom. They're about to face death head-on, completely unprepared, and they believe their freedom is just guaranteed.
The sources detail the inner circle of that party, right? The affluent segment they call the pink dollars.
Yeah, this includes figures like Reuben, the sophisticated stockbroker, and Andrew, who's the director of Carnegie Hall. They are the established elite. Their lives are defined by luxury and influence. They represent what the community had achieved.
And then you have the radical contrast, the Saratoga Friends.
Yes. These characters are the counter-narrative. They have, in a really profound sense, already survived their own plague.
What do you mean by that?
They're a chosen family who met as teenagers at the Saratoga Center for Hope and Healing. It was a rehab center for young people dealing with various high-stakes cancers. We're talking osteosarcoma, Wilms tumor, leukemia, stuff like that.
So they represent survival, a second chance at life.
Exactly. Their entire existence is defined by something called the Saratoga Pact. It was a solemn ritual where they promised each other to remain friends and to live life to the fullest, never wasting a single moment.
Wow, so that contrast is the dramatic fulcrum of the entire design. You have one group defined by surviving death and the other defined by celebrating life just as death arrives unannounced.
And you see that tension immediately heightened because of the structure of time. GL uses a 3-act structure, and it covers 3 consecutive 4th of July parties across 3 years.
The designers deployed what they call temporal compression. So you play out Act 1, Desire, on July 4th, 1982.
Then there's a quick jump. Then you play Act 2, Fear of Death, on July 4th, 1983.
And finally, Act 3, Friendship, July 4th, 1984.
So each act is a single intense day of play, but they're separated by a full traumatic year of fictional time.
And the key to the emotional engineering is that 1-year jump. It happens during this formal act, break after breakfast.
Yeah, players step out of character to reflect. They find out what happened in the world and to their relationships, and they actively steer their character's future path. This whole process forces them to acknowledge the accumulated consequences of their past actions.
It's not just a narrative convenience. That sounds like a massive psychological pressure cooker.
It is.
You're forced, as a player, to just sit and contemplate the slow burn of societal change, the rumors, the loss of friends, the escalation of fear. And it's all synthesized into these few reflective moments before you jump back into the next party, knowing the world has gotten considerably darker.
Exactly. The source material notes this is essential for emotional investment. You build up some complicated conflict in Act 1, and during that act break, you discover the consequences. Maybe a lover left you, or your character became obsessed with activism.
So when you come back in Act 2, you're playing a character who is now carrying a year's worth of accumulated grief and decisions.
Right. It makes the stakes astronomically higher than if you were just starting a new game. It uses repetition, the same celebration, the same location, to highlight the creeping dread and the change year over year.
To manage that kind of volatility, fear, deep longing, confronting mortality, the design philosophy had to be meticulous. The game relies on what's called high transparency. What does that actually mean in the context of Nordic LARP design, especially for a subject this sensitive?
High transparency means the framework is basically the co-star of the show. Players aren't just familiar with the game rules, they're familiar with the meta techniques, the safety tools, and the ultimate intentions of the mechanics before the game even begins.
Okay, so it's all laid out.
Everything. This proactively manages expectations. It turns potential, overwhelming stress into a known, negotiated, and contained risk. The designers are essentially saying, look, we know this is heavy. Here are the tools we're giving you to navigate it safely, and you have agency over the outcome.
And this framework is established through mandatory workshops that focus heavily on safety and negotiation. The cornerstone safety net is simply called the rule of 2 feet.
The open door policy. It's simple. If a player feels uncomfortable in a scene or situation, they are empowered to leave. Immediately. No permission needed, no explanation required.
And the sources even give them a specific in-game excuse for their character, right? To maintain immersion.
They do. I need to take a walk.
Yeah.
That simple phrase is the escape valve.
And for stopping or de-escalating a scene mid-play, they have formal safety words, cut and break.
Yep. Cut means stop everything immediately. Break means slow down and de-escalate. And they practice using these both non-verbally and verbally in the workshops.
I read about that. They practice a simple scene where one partner initiates a kiss and the other uses a hand gesture and the word break to stop it.
And that forces negotiation or just a graceful end to the scene. This preparatory groundwork is absolutely vital. It builds collective trust, which is the foundation of creating a brave space.
It lets players dare to go deeper into a traumatic narrative because they know implicitly that they have the option to pull back or adjust when they need to.
Exactly.
Given how powerful all the safety protocols are, it's honestly astonishing how high risk the central narrative device is. So now we have to talk about the most potent mechanical element, the lottery of death.
Ah, yes.
This is the meta-scene that occurs after the end of Act 1 and Act 2. It determines a character's fate in that intervening year.
It is a stylized moment of immense forced confrontation. Characters, and this is key, still acting in character, have to rate their sexual risk level over the past year using a specific scale, from 1 to 5 tickets.
1 ticket is low risk, 5 tickets is the highest risk, and that's defined as having unprotected penetrative sex with multiple partners.
That risk rating is a brutal self-inventory. It forces the player to confront their character's behavior and the possible real-world consequences. But here's where the historical nuance is just brutally specific. The sources detail that being the passive partner in a sex act carrying a higher risk rating than being the active partner. And this was based on the evolving, incomplete scientific understanding of 1982 and 1983.
Wow, that is a profoundly specific detail. It reflects the volatile, incomplete knowledge of the time.
I mean, think about the psychological impact of that distinction. You are forcing a player to assign risk based on a deeply personal, volatile, historical assumption.
And that self-assessment directly determines their fate.
It maps historical fear directly onto the player. It forces them to internalize the self-worth and shame issues surrounding sexual identity and risk.
It also gives the Saratoga friends, the cancer survivors, a completely distinct perspective, doesn't it?
How so?
Well, they already understand mortality. They already understand the concept of a lottery deciding your fate. So while the Mr. T's party crowd is grappling with these new, terrifying rules for desire, the Saratoga friends have a prior framework for discussing survival and chance.
That's a great point. Precisely. Their previous experience with survival influences their calculation of risk. It often leads them to be more cautious or, conversely, more fatalistic. They're viewing this new crisis through the lens of their past battles with cancer.
Which must add an incredible layer of intergroup tension.
It's incredibly rich.
So once a rating is determined, the player draws a bead from the corresponding jar, and the bead determines if the result is positive or negative for HIV. How is this actually administered to maximize the emotional impact?
It's a calculated, stylized moment of dread. The test result is written down and then delivered to the character by organizer characters.
Not other players.
No. Organizers, who are explicitly instructed to be professional and neutral, they play a doctor and 1 or 2 nurses, and they behave as if it's just another day at the office.
That deliberate neutrality, that's a key design choice.
It is. It's to maximize the player's internal reaction space. By refusing to externalize the drama through some overly emotional non-player character, the designers force the trauma to be processed internally, and then it's shared with the character's loved ones, which mirrors how real-life diagnoses were often delivered in those early years.
That staging, being based on real-life waiting room experiences, it ensures that the players own that trauma completely. And following this moment of intense personal terror, the game shifts immediately into a communal, ritualized expression of grief, the funeral meta-scene.
This is the stylized and unavoidable end of each act. Death, personified often as a woman in black, and 2 angels lead a solemn procession. The characters who died that year, as determined by the lottery, are already lying in coffins.
And the sources outline the precise scripting of this ritual. Players are instructed to collect flowers for the funeral, sometimes one for the character they lost, sometimes one for all the loss they're experiencing.
And Chopin's funeral march is played. As the group approaches the coffins, a sharp distinction is made. Individuals who survived death that year are released to their loved ones for embraces and shared relief.
A profound contrast to those who succumbed.
And the final, poignant detail is the eulogy. Death reads the second chorus of the Star-Spangled Banner as the official eulogy.
The national anthem. That is a powerful symbolic choice.
Incredibly powerful.
It connects this private, ignored tragedy directly to the nation. It highlights the fact that this community was facing a monumental crisis that was being largely ignored by the very government represented by that flag. It's an act of reclaiming patriotism for the marginalized.
Absolutely. It makes the grief political.
Mhm.
It institutionalizes the sense of abandonment that the community felt. They also built in smaller rituals for communal remembrance later in Acts 2 and 3, like midnight memorials.
I read about that, sending paper floats with candles out on a lake or sending up paper balloons for each person who died.
And all these rituals, they just reinforce the community connection that's forged in the face of this overwhelming, escalating loss.
Okay, let's shift focus now to how the game handles desire. We noted that sexuality is the central story engine, and it's designed to generate complex stories far beyond simple arousal.
Right. And because actual sex, drugs, and alcohol are strictly forbidden, they have to rely on highly specific meta techniques.
The primary method for simulated sex scenes is called the phallus method.
The phallus method is mandatory for any scene involving simulated penetrative sex. It serves multiple functions: safety, clarity, and story generation. It requires off-game negotiation, the use of a provided prop.
Which the sources note can be a pink stylized phallus.
It can, and requires that all participants remain fully closed.
Let's focus on that negotiation mandate for a second. It's institutionalizing clarity over ambiguity in these high-intensity moments. When a player initiates a scene, they have to ask, how would you like to play this?
Yes, and the sources stress that the response must be specific, and it has to come from the player, not the character. If the responding player gives a non-specific answer like, oh, I'm up for anything, the negotiation is immediately halted. The scene doesn't happen.
That is crucial. It enforces clear boundaries and ensures both parties are actively consenting to the specific emotional and physical terms of the scene.
It prevents emotional slippage, potential regret, and once the simulated scene is complete, it concludes with a mandatory monologue from each character.
Which provides a moment of immediate reflection and emotional processing.
That's the key analytical component. It forces the player, immediately after a scene of intense desire or physical intimacy, to verbalize what it meant to their character. Was it shame? Was it desperation? A momentary escape?
It turns the physical act into a defined narrative point.
Right. The phallus method is designed to be safer while still portraying sex in a more direct, non-abstract way than a lot of replacement techniques that can sometimes, sanitize the topic.
So to initiate these scenes, they use a simple signaling system. Colored feathers.
Pink feathers, they're used for scenes happening right there and then. Immediate physical intimacy. And it's always followed by that off-game negotiation once the feather is accepted.
And then there are black feathers,
which initiate an invitation to the black box. This is where the truly abstract and deep emotional work takes place.
So the black box is this designated room for highly stylized, abstract, or non-linear scenes that just can't logistically happen in the timeline of the main party.
Precisely. If a memory or an abstract concept is too heavy for the party scene, it goes to the black box.
And the scenes that unfold inside are essential for catharsis?
Oh yeah. They could depict the past, possible futures, or highly imaginary concepts. For example, the sources detail scenes where one player might play a character's cancer and another might play their consciousness, allowing the character to have a dialogue with their own disease.
Or a player can play characters other than their own. Maybe they play a memory of someone's parent or a doctor to explore a traumatic interaction that shaped their current character.
Yes, and if the scene gets stuck or needs direction, an organizer or even another participant can step in as a director to provide input or suggestions on how to deepen the emotional stakes.
It allows for truly cathartic, highly personalized storytelling without disrupting the main narrative flow of the party.
Exactly. And the person who invites others defines this scene, and it ends when one of the players just says thank you. It ensures emotional containment and a clear transition back to the main game.
This emotional flexibility is just so central to the design. And speaking of specific locations, we have to address the dark room. This is a specific in-game location designed in Act 1 for anonymous, uninhibited gay sex. The rules are strict. No speaking aloud, maybe some brief whispering, but the goal is pure hedonism, to get horny by looking, wanking, or having simulated sex.
And crucially, players are told that while they, as players, can see, their characters perceive the room as so dark that everyone inside is anonymous, even if they interact with characters they know well.
So it's a space built on maximum desire and anonymity. It's designed to represent the ultimate freedom of that pre-crisis era.
It is literally ground zero for hedonism and desire in the game's architecture.
And this is where the design connects to the eventual emotional outcome, foreshadowing the finale. Because as the source material mentions, in the later acts 1983 and 1984, as the fear of death rose exponentially, these spaces that were designed for desire often became eerily empty.
That transformation, that profound visual absence of desire, it speaks volumes about the collective psychological impact of the crisis.
The world of JL is intentionally dense, isn't it? It's populated by this huge, highly detailed cast, layered together through what they call core groups and social circles.
Yet the core groups are the primary drivers of the story, and the social circles are the necessary flavor and backdrop, representing diverse NYC communities. Every single vulnerability is connected to the escalating crisis.
So let's start with the Greenwich Village scene, Mr. T's party guests, the representation of affluence and desire. The most influential layer is the Pink Dollars group.
Right. And here we meet Reuben, the stockbroker, who's a huge admirer of ancient Greek culture. He romanticizes the Erastus-Aramenos relationship with his much younger boyfriend, Ike.
Okay, for anyone listening, can you explain that? Erastes-Aramenos.
Sure. The Erastes was the older, active lover and mentor, while the Aramenos was the younger, passive, mentored one. It was often this idealized, sort of non-reciprocal mentorship relationship.
So Reuben is trying to impose this classical, idealized, almost non-sexualized structure onto his contemporary relationship with Ike.
Who, ironically, seems completely ungrateful and is behaving like a typical modern, sometimes distant boyfriend. So Reuben is dealing with deep-seated family rejection. And now he's deeply stressed because Ike appears ungrateful and might be leaving. This results in loud, dramatic quarrels, sometimes even happening over the phone during the party.
So his romanticization is a form of denial. He's trying to elevate his relationship above the crude realities of the village scene, just as those realities are becoming terrifying.
Exactly. Then we move into the leather and fetish subculture, the Cruisers Club, an exclusive, men-only voluntary organization centered on controlled, hardcore S&M.
And here we see Stephen, the club president. The sources describe him as a passionately leftist and promiscuous activist who also enjoys intense S&M sessions.
That contrast shows the duality of the community. Political radicalism and sexual exploration just going hand in hand. Then you have Andrew, the Carnegie Hall director, the practical one, who finds stability and control in the club's rules.
And Jimmy, a former addict, now turned yoga ambassador, who finds that specific combination of control and sex in the club liberating after years of chaos.
Right. And the relentless nightlife is so central to Act One. You've got Club Diamond, the drag show club, home to Nate, the Queen of Manhattan. His star performer is Daniel Lady Verona, who's leading this highly secret life.
Daniel is actually a lab assistant. He dreams of a stable scientific career, but he finds real success, adoration, and wealth only as a star drag queen.
The tension there is immediate. Which identity is going to provide safety when the crisis hits? Will the scientific world he admires save his friends, or will the emotional community of the club be what sustains him?
And finally, you have the chaotic, fast-moving energy of the Studio 54 crew. This is the raw energy of the disco scene.
You've got Sorrento, the eccentric event manager, Leon, the disco star, famous for his hit I Was Made for Dancin', who now struggles with expensive habits and sells drugs for extra income.
And Shane, the go-go dancer and porn model, whose single goal is to be filthy rich and screw all the beautiful men in New York all at the same time.
You can just see that dense web of ambitions, financial vulnerabilities, and sexual openness layered right beneath the party surface. The system is designed so that when the lottery of death hits, the consequences just ripple through these interconnected financial, sexual, and professional circles simultaneously.
Okay, now let's contrast all of that with the alternative scene. The Saratoga Friends. They define themselves by survival, but they're seeking alternative lifestyles as a pathway to control.
The heart of Saratoga acts as the spiritual core. It features Joanni, the Tantra guru, who has dismissed the patriarchal god and embraced the goddess.
What's her philosophy?
She embodies a belief that destruction is a necessary and important part of the divine cycle. This framework gives her an emotional language for discussing the epidemic that the Greenwich Village crowd stuck in their secular hedonism might totally lack.
They also have the Indigo House, a polyfidelity commune. And here we meet Wallace, an art gallery owner dealing with a profound crisis of impotence.
And this is incredibly significant in the context of the game. He feels that a man who can't get his dick hard is a man that can be ignored.
Mm.
I mean, that is a brutal summary of the link between identity, desirability, and power in the 80s gay community.
And his impotence is driving him into New Age spirituality for a cure. He's searching for control over his body and his power.
Which is a common reaction when you're faced with a disease that targets the very core of your identity and sexuality.
And the concept of communal grief is proactively institutionalized among the Saratoga Friends. They have the grief circle.
Yeah, a formal support group led by characters like Beatrice and Beverly. It was created specifically to process feelings of loss over people or things they had lost long before AIDS was even a thought.
We have to zoom in on the character Marcus. He sounds fascinating. A temperamental political activist, an amateur drag performer from a conservative Christian family.
He broke with them over his sexuality, but remains a conflicted Christian. He experiences these episodes where he feels close to God and even believes he can absorb other people's physical or emotional pain, believing God is guiding him.
But even within his closest circle, he's facing complex issues of identity and acceptance that reflect the intra-community tensions of the era.
For sure. His boss, Nick, is a trans man, and Marcus privately struggles with fully understanding gender identity crisis. He wonders if his passion for drag means he should question his own gender, and he's paralyzed by the fear that he might say something hurtful or reductive to Nick.
That inner conflict it's just so fascinating. Marcus is trying to reconcile his sexuality, his faith, his identity, and his desire to be an ally without the vocabulary of the 21st century.
And the game uses these deeply human struggles to show that the crisis wasn't just external. It amplified pre-existing tensions within the community about identity, power, and acceptance. The depth of these character conflicts ensures that every participant, no matter their core story, has multiple layers of drama and potential tragedy just waiting to unfold across the 3 years of the LARP.
So when a work of art, especially a participatory one like a LARP, chooses a historical tragedy as its subject, the HIV outbreak, it inevitably invites intense scrutiny. And this leads us directly to the aesthetic responsibility debate that surrounded Jail's premiere. It really questioned the validity of the medium itself.
This was a major point of discussion in Scandinavian media. The key question, which was famously raised by the art critic Philip Tier, was very direct. Is LRP the right medium for treating the HIV outbreak?
His concern was whether it amounted to grief tourism, just spectating on historical suffering, or just frivolous 80s nostalgia.
He was essentially questioning the privilege of interpretation when you're dealing with such profound recent suffering.
And this debate came at a unique time for the form itself. The analysis by Toa George argued that AROP was just starting to knock on the doors of the artistic establishment. Before this, AROP often existed outside of formal artistic criticism.
And that sudden attention forced the LRP community to look critically at its own work and address these deeper questions about aesthetic responsibility.
So how did the designers respond to that grief tourism critique?
They offered a powerful rebuttal. They argued that critical art requires engagement, not just observation. By requiring players to step into the vulnerability of the characters and face the lottery of death, they mitigate frivolous engagement. You can't just observe the pain, you have to shoulder the risk.
So if the AROC community wants to be taken seriously as an art form, it has to be ready to enter conversations about the politics of your desire with people who might not be in power over how their history is written.
GL forces that conversation.
It does, and largely because it uses these formalized rituals not just for atmosphere, but to facilitate deep, mediated emotional engagement. One of the most fascinating examples of controlling the narrative experience is the green drink ceremony.
Ah, yes, the green drink. It's served to everyone at midnight. It's both an in-game ritual and this incredibly powerful meta technique. The characters consume this magical drink, which has, unspecified contents in-game, but everyone knows its function out of game.
And its function is transformative. It gives players an in-game alibi to either double the intensity of the storyline they're currently playing,
Escalating a building conflict.
or to completely redirect their character's trajectory 180 degrees.
It institutionalizes the ability to pull a narrative emergency brake or hit a hyperdrive button.
So it mimics the unpredictable, transformative, life-altering moments of intense emotion, or maybe even hallucinogens, but it safely hands the steering wheel back to the player to optimize their emotional experience.
Exactly. If they were stuck in a conflict that felt dull, they can use the drink to escalate it into a crisis. If they're spiraling too intensely, they can use the drink as a justification for a sudden shift toward hope or reconciliation.
That kind of agency, built into a ritual, is incredibly potent for generating flow and ownership of the story.
It reflects the real-world chaos of the 80s, the sudden dramatic changes in behavior, belief, and relationships that characterize the time.
Beyond specific rituals, the design embeds emotional memory through music. The theme song itself is Dusty Springfield's "Just a Little Lovin' Will Go a Long Way."
And the sources note the powerful, lasting impact of hearing songs built into the design, including others like Dead or Alive's You Spin Me Round Like a Record. For many participants, these songs are now forever inseparable from the intense, specific memories and emotions created in the LARP.
It ties the historical aesthetic directly to the cathartic experience. And finally, we have to revisit this extraordinary moment of real-world resonance the designers captured. In Act 3, 1984, during the final breakfast, two gay characters held an impromptu, deeply emotional, and unlawful wedding ceremony.
Right, to celebrate their commitment and their survival.
This moment, already deeply poignant within the fiction of 1984, gained this unexpected, almost supernatural weight in reality.
The source material highlights that the U.S. Supreme Court ruling on marriage equality occurred the very next day, in real time, over 30 years later. The ritual enacted in the LARP briefly foreshadowed a monumental shift in legal and social acceptance.
Wow. It provides a powerful encapsulation of the game's core success. It's weaving accurate historical context, engineered emotion, and intensely personal narrative into an experience that transcends mere entertainment and truly becomes a powerful form of critical art.
It's an exercise in temporal and emotional bridge building.
So to recap, Just a Little Lovin' succeeds because it is relentlessly honest about its design.
It deploys these strict, transparent mechanics from the high-stakes, historical accuracy of the Lottery of Death to the boundary-setting specificity of the phallus method. And it combines them with potent communal rituals like the funeral medicine and the transformative green drink.
And this design allows players to explore the emotionally challenging history of desire, loss, and community during the AIDS crisis, with both depth and a profound sense of safety and self-agency.
It's the ultimate shortcut to understanding a historical moment, not through reading historical accounts, but by actively participating in its emotional core, mediated by expert design that prioritizes both narrative power and personal safety.
And if we revisit the most powerful symbolic transformation detailed in the source material, that metamorphosis of the dark room, it leaves us with a pretty provocative final thought about the nature of crisis and desire.
It does.
We established that the dark room was specifically designed for anonymous, uninhibited desire in the first act. It represented the absolute peak of sexual freedom.
But as the crisis escalated and the fear of the lottery began to dominate, this space of desire became hauntingly empty in 1983 and 1984.
So what does that profound empty space tell us about the human experience of collective fear?
I mean, when a societal crisis fundamentally changes the meaning of a physical space built for desire, how does the memory of that past freedom and that raw desire continue to haunt the present? And how do people navigate that loss of freedom in a world that is suddenly less safe, even in its most secret corners?
That lingering echo of past pleasure replaced by present emptiness.
That might be the most powerful unwritten story of the entire deep dive.
That is a deep thought to chew on. Thank you for joining us for the deep dive into Just a Little Lovin'. We'll see you next time.